So you've got the title of the talk right here, and some of you have probably already guessed what The Prince and the Fox refers to. For those of you that aren't yet quite sure, I'll read a short passage from the book that this is from, and it might give you a few clues. And I think that it's a nice little passage that will sort of introduce us to how we can think about friendship and relationships. It was then that the fox appeared. "Good morning," said the fox. "Good morning," the prince responded politely, although when he turned around, he saw nothing. "I'm right here," the voice said, "under the apple tree." "Who are you?" asked the prince, and added, "You are very pretty to look at." "I'm a fox," the fox said. "Come and play with me," proposed the prince. "I'm so unhappy." "I cannot play with you," the fox said. "I'm not tamed." "What does that mean, tame?" "It is an act too often neglected," said the fox. "It means to establish ties." Okay, so this was something that I thought was quite appropriate to introduce us to the notion of friendship. It's this notion that we can build ties with other people. And friendship is something that we're all involved in to some, in different ways. And it's not always something that we necessarily stop to think about and dissect. So in my talk, I've got a few stories like this one. I've got a little bit of theory, a tiny bit of theology. So hopefully there's something for everyone. But what I really want to get across is that to live out good and healthy friendships doesn't require us to really understand all the theories about friendship and how it works. What's more important is to have an inner disposition within which we are open to having healthy friendships. So that's what I'm going to try to hopefully portray to you today. Now, in thinking about friendship and how I've thought about it in the past, I was brought back to a memory that I had last summer when I was on a lovely retreat with the Dominican sisters up in Staffordshire. And there were about 15 of us, and what we did for 4 days is that we thought about the question, what does it mean to be human? And we based a lot of our reflection and study on Aristotle, namely what he wrote on the soul and on politics. And it was a fascinating 4 days where we were praying together, we were reading together, studying together. And then I left and I went home. And then I had lots of friends who were asking me what I was doing for that long weekend and what I got out of it. And what really struck me was to the extent to which Aristotle really believed that friendships and relationships was a very key aspect of what it meant to be human. That in a sense, we are built for relationships. We have relationships all around us. Our identities are very much linked with our relationships. And so it really struck me that if relationships is such a key part of what it means to be human, it's not something that we want to neglect, because if we do, we might miss out on really being fully ourselves. And when I was invited to speak at this event and to think about what it meant to live a balanced life, I was really struck by the 4 pillars that were chosen, in the sense that I came to see how relationships and friendship was really central to supporting the other pillars. And I think we can see that in several ways. But the way in which I saw it very clearly, and which I thought about quite instinctively when I saw the 4 pillars, is this notion of accountability, right? There's a slogan that I like to keep in the back of my mind, and that slogan is, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with," right? You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Now, that's not something that I would sort of hold to very strictly, because obviously I think we're much more than just an average of the 5 people we spend time with. But what I think is very powerful in that short little statement is that it's helped me a lot to think about how my standards gravitate in line with the people that I spend time with. and how people keep me accountable in various aspects of my life. And that happens through friendship and relationships. So when thinking about the other pillars of a balanced life, right, when we think about purpose, right, which we heard about yesterday, it struck me that whenever I'm around people that have very strong purpose in their lives, there's something particularly compelling and attractive about that experience, about hearing how someone is very passionate about something, right? So, namely, when Adam was telling me about the whole Balanced Life project, I could really feel the passion in his voice and how he had found something that was really giving purpose to what he was doing. And so the reason I raise this is because I find that whenever I'm trying to adopt a certain new behavior, let's say, and in this case it might be to have more purpose in my life, what I found helpful is to actually think about what are the people that I can spend time with that can help me to raise my standards in that kind of area. And I think we can say something similar for healthy habits, which is one of the other pillars. So we had a great fitness session just a few hours ago, but I'm sure that if I had spent some time with Iggy and we hadn't exercised together, and we hadn't even eaten together so I could see how healthily he eats, I'm guessing, I still think that the way in which you think about your health, which is one of the 4 pillars, it pervades other aspects of your life as well. And as we're here over this weekend, we're listening to talks, we're involved in activities, I think there's a certain amount that we can learn from these talks. But I think there's a lot we can learn as well from being around people who are living out these pillars in a particular way. So, one way in which that might take place is if I had met Iggy at a party one evening, and we were chatting, and then all of a sudden Iggy goes, "Oh, by the way, I've got to leave now." And I might go, "Well, it's really early, like the party's just started, where are you going?" And Iggy might respond, "Oh, actually, I need to get some sleep so that I can get to the gym in the morning before I head to work." And that might strike me because if that's not something that I'm necessarily used to, I might be aware intellectually that there are people who go to the gym before work and they take care of their health in that way. But to have a relationship with someone who is actually living that out makes it much more real and concrete to me. It makes me think, oh, well, if he can do it, maybe there's a chance that I can do it. I think there's a similar thing that can be said about impact that we have. So we heard about the impact we can have through our work earlier today, and we're going to hear tomorrow about the positive impact we can have on the environment. And I think that in a similar way, I always realize that when I spend time with people who are making an impact in their work in an intentional way, it really forces me to ask myself those questions about what am I doing to live in an intentional way that takes those things into account. So I think this notion of being the average of the people we spend time around has been very helpful for me in thinking about friendships and relationships. Okay, so I'm going to jump back a little bit to Aristotle and his notion that we are meant and built for relationships. And I'm just going to allow myself a short little geeky theology interlude, if you don't mind. One of the things that Aristotle was keen on is to try to show what the difference is between us human beings and other animals, right? And what he came up with was this notion that what's distinctive about us is that we have an intellect through which we know, and a will through which we choose or we love. And what struck me about that is several hundred years later, when Christian theologians would be asking questions about the Trinity, there were certain theologians who would make the connection that the second person of the Trinity, the Son, comes from God's intellect or from God knowing himself, and that the Holy Spirit comes from God loving himself or God's will. So I found that parallel quite interesting, to think about the things that make us human are also the things that allow us to have, from a Christian perspective, friendship with God by joining into the divine life with him. So I just find that quite interesting to meditate upon. But what did Aristotle have to say specifically about friendship? So Aristotle had this neat little framework about different types of friendship. And what he's trying to do, I think, in this framework is to get us to think about how we can reach this highest level of friendship that he is referring to. So his first level of friendship is what he calls the friendship of utility. So this is the case where, for example, I like meat and cheese, and I've got a butcher, Francesco, who lives just a few minutes from me. And so when I feel like having some meat or some cheese, I can go to Francesco, I can get some meat, some cheese, and our relationship that we have, the friendship that we have, is based off of this mutual interaction that is sort of set in those particular circumstances, right? So Aristotle says, well, it's fine for people to have all sorts of different types of relationships, right? Not everyone is necessarily going to be your very best friend that you share your heart with. But what Aristotle says is that if the circumstances change, so let's say that Francesco actually moves away to another part of town, right? The friendship might not be there anymore because we don't have that mutual interest any longer. Then Aristotle talks about a second type of friendship, which he calls the friendship of pleasure, which is two people that come together for an activity that they both enjoy. So one example of this would be when I was growing up in Finland, in Helsinki. I used to love to play tennis, and I had a tennis partner named Otto, and we would meet to play tennis, and we were good friends. I think we would chat about different things, but our friendship was really based on the fact that we both wanted to practice tennis together, right? And when I moved away from Finland, I then didn't, that friendship and that relationship, even though we might have stayed in touch, that friendship was very different once we could no longer have that thing in common of being able to play tennis together. Okay, so then this leads Aristotle to talk about this third type of friendship, which he calls the friendship of goodness, or friendship of virtue is a word that he sometimes uses. And this is, for Aristotle, the highest level of friendship, because it's a friendship that isn't based on particular circumstances that may change or that may fleet at some point or another. It's more based on wanting what is good for the other person and trying to bring out the best in the other person. And by opening that person's imagination to things that they may not have thought about before, or that they may not have thought possible for them to do before, right? And that also links with this notion that within a healthy friendship, a friend can also be honest with you about the things that he or she thinks you might need to reform in your life. So with me, for example, I've had friends who have noticed in the past that I've spent way too long watching cat videos on YouTube, for example. And sometimes it might be hard for us to really to accept that sort of feedback. But actually, once we understand that it's coming from a place of love and from a place of the other person wanting to will what is good for us, then we can have this relationship where we can accept feedback from our friends. Okay, so we said that friendships that are built upon what is good and what is good for the other person, those can last, right? But we also know that friendships take time to develop, and that making time for friends is a crucial element to them. And one way that I like to think about this is the following. So let's say I know I'm going to meet someone in, let's say, a month's time. But within that time, I might do some research on that person. I might go on their Facebook profile or their Twitter profile, see what they're up to, see what they're like. And that would give me a certain amount of information about that particular person. Then I might go a step further, and I might actually meet some of this person's friends. And this would give me even more information about that person. It would allow me to build a more accurate picture of what that person is like. But still, I wouldn't really know that person very well. And it's only once I actually spend time with the person and really make a point of prioritizing time with that person that I can really have a relationship with that person and get to know them. And if I try to think about the people that are closest to me in my life and what it would be like if I had never met them, but I had been able to do all sorts of different research on them, how much I would lack in terms of my understanding of that person. I think that's, for me, that's been quite a powerful thing to think about. And I'll come back in a moment to this notion of time and commitment as well. Okay, so yeah, leading on from that, I'm going to read another passage from The Little Prince that illustrates this notion of time. So we're back to the fox and the little prince. The fox gazed at the little prince for a long time. "Please, tame me," he said. "I want to, very much," the little prince replied. "But I have not much time. I have friends to discover, and a great many things to understand." "One only understands the things one tames," said the fox. "Men have no more time to understand anything. They buy things already made at the shops. But there is no shop anywhere where one can buy friendship, and so men have no friends anymore. If you want a friend, tame me." "What must I do to tame you?" asked the little prince. "You must be very patient," replied the fox. So we know that spending quality time with someone is a key ingredient to friendship. But let's think a little bit more about what happens when two people are interacting and building a friendship. And as I was trying to uncover what might happen in this instance, I think we can be helped a lot by the wisdom of a 13th century Dominican friar, Thomas Aquinas. So Thomas Aquinas wrote vastly on the virtues and on happiness, and we can see that he's very much influenced by Aristotle's notions and frameworks. But I think that he adds something very distinct to his writing that can help us think about friendship. And that particular thing is this notion of shared wonder, right? So shared wonder is whenever someone sees something that is inspiring or incredible, and that person then wants to share what they're wondering about with someone else. And at that time, you've actually got two people that are looking outwards in the same direction. And this can be something very, very powerful in building friendships. And actually, I think that it's something very integral to who we are as human beings, because from very early on, we see babies doing this, right? At a certain age, babies will start pointing at things, right? Look, mommy, look at this. And what they're really doing there is they're wanting to share the wonder that they have in something. They want someone else to be able to share in their happiness, in their wonder. So I think it's very interesting that babies, do this at a very young age. But also interesting to notice how we sometimes lose this sense of wonder when we grow up. And so what I next want to do is actually say a few things about the things that might take us away from the ability to share wonder. And I think that C.S. Lewis actually has some interesting things to say. Well, actually, before I get to that, I think there's another little quote from him I really like about friendship, which is, "Friendship is born at the moment when one man says to another, 'What? You too? I thought that no one but myself,'" right? So again, it's the same notion of being awe-inspired with something and then being able to share it with someone. Okay, so I think C.S. Lewis gives us a clue into one of the main things that makes it difficult for us to have relationships where we can really share what we wonder about. "To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything, and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly be broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even to an animal. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken, but it will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. To love is to be vulnerable, which brings us back actually to the one of the originations of this Balanced Life project, which was Brené Brown's talk on the power of vulnerability, which is obviously very crucial in terms of building and sustaining true friendships, right? So then I tried to ask myself, what is my behavior when I'm not able to really be vulnerable with the people I should be vulnerable with? And one thing that I catch myself doing sometimes is maybe using irony or sarcasm to sort of mask this fear of vulnerability. So that's something that I try to keep in mind as well, to make sure that I'm being sincere with the people around me. Something I just wanted to briefly mention that I feel takes us away from shared wonder, and you may have been expecting it already, is social media. Luckily for us this weekend, or at least for me, the Wi-Fi in my room is terrible, so even if I wanted to, I can't get my Facebook profile. So yes, I mean, I think we've all heard this before, that social media, can at times lead us to thinking very superficially about friendships. But for me, it's interesting to think about, because when I started working in marketing about 5 years ago, I was asked to do some research into how these companies like Facebook and Twitter, how they build their algorithms and how they build their websites and their apps. And what I was in a way shocked to find is that these companies have whole teams of people dedicated to addicting us to their apps. And they do this in all sorts of ways, right? And I think one of the primary ways in which they do this is the infinite scroll, right? So you all know this. You go on your Facebook profile, and you can basically scroll for an infinite amount of time. And what's happening there is that your brain is constantly looking for these little micro rewards that might be hiding just behind the next scroll, right? So you might see something that catches your attention, but you think, oh, no, there's maybe something better just behind, and you keep scrolling, keep scrolling, and what it does is that it really messes with the reward centers in our brain, and it teaches us this very vicious cycle of always wanting to look more, which then also leads on to the next point I wanted to mention, which is FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. Nowadays, with all the interactions that we have, with all the options and possibilities that we have, it's getting more and more difficult for us to actually commit to things, right? So how many times have you been invited to a party? Either it might be through a Facebook event or a friend has texted you, and you're invited to this party over the weekend, but you don't reply straight away. And maybe we don't always realize why it is we don't reply, but I think one of the reasons is that we've gotten used to so many options that in the back of our mind we're thinking like, oh, but if I say yes to this party, I might not be able to go to this other party that I might get invited to, right? Maybe someone more popular is going to invite me or something like that. And this builds this whole pattern within us where we no longer feel comfortable in committing because we feel that we are narrowing our options. But I think in life, sometimes it is important to narrow our options in order to then have the possibility of having something much greater. Right, so after what we've just said about friendships, about how we are built for friendships, but then whenever we try to have these experiences of shared wonder, there's all these things that get in the way. Is there really any hope that friendship can get us through the hard times? And I would say a definite yes to that. And I think there's few people who have understood this, or at least who have written about this better than one of my favorite authors, Tolkien. Tolkien's works, The Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion, The Hobbit, it's full of very strong statements about friendship. And so I just wanted to read you a very quick one, which is one of my all-time favorite passages, This is just after the Council of Elrond in Rivendell, where Frodo has agreed to take the ring and bring it to Mordor, risking his life. And then, one by one, the members of the Fellowship join him, as do Merry and Pippin, right, who weren't invited to the council, but they show up anyways. And when they do, Elrond is not having any of this, right? So Elrond is the very wise elf that everyone goes to for counsel, for wise advice. And he's having none of it. He doesn't want them to go. What can two little hobbits added to this fellowship do any good in the face of all of this incredible danger? And that's when Gandalf steps in. And this is what he says. It is true that if these hobbits understood the danger, they would not dare to go. But I think, Elrond, that in this matter, it would be well to trust rather to friendship than to great wisdom. Right. So obviously the great wisdom that he's referring to is Elrond, who everyone always goes to for wisdom and counsel. But in this particular case, Gandalf actually thinks that the friendships that the hobbits have is actually more powerful than Elrond's wisdom, which is a very powerful statement. And as we know, in the end, Gandalf was right.
Spoiler.
So that's what I wanted to share with you today. I'll just leave you with one more little thing. A few days ago, I was very graciously invited to Adam's family home for a lovely meal on New Year's Day. And Joe was with us. So Joe, I don't think Joe has arrived yet, but he'll be arriving later today. And Joe had a really interesting question that he went around the table and asked all of us. He said, what is it in 2020 that you want to achieve? And I thought, okay, need to come up with something clever to say. It kind of caught me off guard, and I wasn't, hadn't really thought about it much. And so I ended up saying something about my work and my job. But then that night, when I was walking home, I thought about it, and I thought, okay, what do I actually want to do in 2020? And then I thought about my closest relationships. And I thought, well, what if it would be a resolution this year to really focus on those? What if I actually focused on being a good son to my parents, or a good brother to my sisters, or a good uncle to my niece, or a good friend to my closest friends? And then I thought, well, I mean, is that enough? Is that really enough, to keep me going and to act as a resolution for this year? And then I thought, yes, actually. And because of what I said earlier about how our relationships really supports all of the other pillars in the balanced life, I thought that, yes, I think for me this year, to focus on my relationships and to try and lead a balanced life through that way, I think that's enough. So that's what I wanted to share today, and I'm happy to take any questions that anyone might have.